Whatever happened to predictability? The milkman, the paperboy, evening TV. You miss your old familiar friends, but waiting just around the bend. Everywhere you look, there's a heart, a hand to hold on to. Everywhere you look, there's a face of somebody who needs you. When you're lost out there and you're all alone, a light is waiting to carry you home. Everywhere you look.
Okay, so I'm going to make a really quick video just on congressional leaders because I really like laying out who the new congressional leaders are, what they're doing, and especially right now as we get into this really important part of impeachment, we are going to be talking a lot and you're going to be hearing a lot from certain leaders in our party. I'm also going to talk about people who are local leaders so that way you guys who are in Congress, so that way you guys can know who they are, who your representative might be. You might want to look this up because there are a couple people who you should know what their policies are and what you're voting for. I'm probably only going to talk about Sac, Elk Grove, Folsom, things like that where it's closer by neighborhoods and stuff. So just to start, I'm going to talk about the leaders in the House of Representatives. And the first one we're going to talk about is Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is from San Francisco. She is the Speaker of the House. This is the second time that she has been Speaker of the House. She's the first woman to have ever been Speaker of the House. Has a very good way of leading her party, raises a ton of money. She's able, for the most part, to keep control of her party and keep them in line, especially when she was minority leader. A little bit harder now that she's Speaker of the House. You just have a very raucous new set of Democrats who I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about one specifically, especially since the election of President Trump. There's been a readjusting of liberals and the super liberals and then kind of the moderate liberals. And that's kind of where Nancy Pelosi sits. She's more of a moderate liberal, even though she represents probably the most liberal district in the world. She is very, very influential on raising money. I mean, this is probably her biggest strength, and why she's kept power is because she can raise money not only for herself, but for everyone around her. She doesn't really need to run anymore, to be quite honest. She has firm control over her congressional spot. She wins like 70% of the vote every time that she runs. It's highly unlikely she's going to lose her spot in Congress. I don't know how much longer she's going to serve. I think she's like 70 something right now. She's not going to serve much longer, it sounds like. And I think as long as she is keeping that power balance, she's going to stay through the Trump administration and then maybe bow out after a bit, depending on if she can keep her leadership spot. There's a really good question about that. And now actually the impeachment trial has kind of started, or at least the investigation is beginning. She has kind of like mellowed out the really liberal side of her party. And it seems like she made a good decision to go forward on an impeachment trial because there seems to be a lot of evidence against President Trump. And even though it might not lead to his removal, there's a very good chance it could lead to his impeachment and potentially could be pretty politically damaging for him. And that's kind of the balance that she's trying to strike, because impeachment can be a very politically charged thing, obviously. When Bill Clinton was impeached, Republicans really got bashed for it. And that's what Democrats were trying to avoid. They were not trying to lose the majority in the House. And it seems like people are a little bit more supportive of impeachment as of this moment than they were in the past. So right now, Nancy Pelosi has kind of really guided the party beyond a certain point. I think that she is going to keep leadership. It sounds like for the next year. We'll see if the Democrats can keep the majority in the House. But if they lose it, I think she's probably done. And there's a very good chance that she could step down after that point. We'll have to see. I mean, for right now, she's going to be the head of the party. She's going to be head of the leadership in the House. She's going to be a main point person when it comes to the impeachment trial of President Trump. The next person we're going to talk about is the majority leader of the House. That's Steny Hoyer. Steny Hoyer is from Maryland. He has been in the House, the Democratic leadership for a very long time. I think it's been on like 10, 15 years almost now. Steny is just pretty much like, you would talk about like a moderate liberal. He's very moderate, and he kind of almost goes towards the middle and independent almost sometimes. But he's pretty fervently Democrat and is a very solidly old school Democrat. Honestly, he doesn't do much. I would say Pelosi holds most of the power. Steny's kind of like the guy that she knows no one's ever going to really like vote for him in a leadership position. He's kind of not threatening, so I think that's part of the reason he might be in that position. But he's also was a whip when she was minority leader. He was the whip in the House. He's able to get a lot of votes for certain things, but he's also criticized the very left side of the party, so it's kind of caused some friction a little bit. I would tell you that to keep an eye on that, but Steny, really, people don't go for him unless it's something really important. They want to get his opinion on it. They really don't go to him. They go to Pelosi first. She is the leader of the House, and they don't really share that leadership at all. And I think most people actually look to her for leadership and guidance. The next person we're going to talk about is the minority leader in the House, and this guy's name is Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy is also from California. He is more of the middle of California and represents that area, but he is a very solid Republican and really has done a lot for the party. When Paul Ryan, who was the former Speaker of the House, left, he actually got passed over for a leadership position, unfortunately for him. People just didn't see him really as a leader. But if the Republicans win again, he's a very good chance of becoming Speaker of the House. I would say he has probably the outright ability to do that as of right now. But honestly, like, he's not that popular usually. You know, he's kind of just like a whatever minority leader, I would say. He's really pushed back against impeachment. He's kind of Trump's guy for the House. Definitely, like, Trump looks to him for certain things. Kevin McCarthy can't control much in the House right now. He's not Speaker of the House. So he's really not that much used to Trump, but he's a Trump guy. I mean, like, he will stick with him through and through. His power is limited on what he can do in the minority role. He doesn't hold as much sway as Pelosi did when she was minority leader. He just hasn't been there long enough, and a lot of his Republican colleagues don't really listen to him. Republicans kind of went through a weird time when they were going with Kevin McCarthy, because there was like this super right-wing part of the party and very moderate Republicans, and that's why they voted Paul Ryan in, because Paul Ryan was kind of like an in-between where he wasn't really, people didn't look at him too bad, but he was more of a moderate Republican anyway, especially now. But a lot of those really hardcore conservative congressmen have kind of like been voted out or have left. They don't have as much power as they did before. The moderates are more taking over again, so it's swinging back the other way. So Kevin McCarthy was an obvious choice for minority leader. I don't know if he becomes Speaker of the House. So the whips in the House, there's one on the Democratic side is Jim Clyburn. On the other side is Steve Scalise. Jim Clyburn has been a congressman for a very long time. He's a whip, so his power is kind of adjusting. Also, honestly, like, he's kind of an in-name only representative. I would say he just has a lot of clout. He's been there for a number of years. Steve Scalise actually is the Republican whip, and honestly, I would say he probably has a lot of power because McCarthy doesn't have much sway over certain things. Steve Scalise is more of a moderate, but also has kind of more right-wing tendencies. He actually was shot a couple years ago by a gunman at like a congressional softball game. It's pretty awful, but he managed to survive, and he is now still there. Pretty amazing story, actually. Again, like, his power is depending on what McCarthy does, what the Republicans can do. They have a pretty solidly split Congress right now, where Democrats have a pretty firm grip on that. I think they're above like 20. I think they have like 248 Democrats right now, which is about 20 more than they need for like a half of the House. So they have a pretty solid majority. So it's really hard for Republicans to do anything. If that majority was a little bit less, they would have more power. But as of right now, they don't have much to do. For local congressional people, the first one that I want to talk about is Ami Bera. Ami Bera won office in 2012. For the first time, he has since been able to be reelected in a really tough congressional district. He is in Elk Grove, Folsom, a very kind of like middle of the road. For anyone who lives in Elk Grove and Folsom, it kind of depends on where you live, whether it's super Republican or they're sometimes super liberals. It tends to swing more conservative than anything else. But this overall district is kind of moderate for the most part. So a lot of people have been voting Ami Bera in. He had a really tough couple of elections when Obama was in office because, I mean, honestly, he was just really close to being voted out. Some people really don't like him. His dad actually had a campaign finance issue. His dad gave money from family members to his campaign, and it's I can't remember the exact story, but his dad ended up going to prison, and it's a pretty horrible story. I mean, the guy was 80 years old, and I think he's still alive. I don't know if he's in prison right now. I think he was released. But Ami Bera wasn't found to have done anything wrong, and he was able to survive this, shockingly. And part of the reason he was able to survive that is because Trump won, and he had a really tough election campaign when Trump was elected in 2016. And 2018, he was able to secure it because there were more Democrats during the midterms who really came out in large numbers and kept him in office. He's a pretty moderate Democrat. He was a doctor at UC Davis. He lives in Elk Grove, so he knows the district pretty well, and I don't see him really losing his seat for the next couple years at least. Since more than likely, the way that voting usually works, there's usually whenever whoever's in office, so if it's a Republican in office, there's a lot of Democrats who show up, and if it's a Democrat in office, a lot of Republicans show up for midterms. So I would be surprised if he loses the next election cycle, depending on how the turnout is for the Democratic candidate, whoever comes out against Trump. But don't be surprised if he loses, let's say Trump gets voted out of office in 2020, and then in the midterm elections, I wouldn't be surprised if he's voted out then. If Trump is still in office after 2020 don't be surprised if he is still in there in the 2020 range and things like that. Like, I just don't really see that going away, to be quite honest. He has a lot of clout now too. I mean, he's won for 4 elections in a very kind of moderate district. At one point, this was considered one of the biggest swing districts in the country, and they weren't really sure which way it was going to go. It's pretty amazing that he's able to keep a seat. But I would definitely tell you to look into his stuff a little bit more. He's an interesting congressperson. The next one is Doris Matsui, and Doris Matsui represents most of Sacramento and the region in Sacramento. Doris Matsui is also really interesting because she took over for her late husband who died while he was in office. He was a congressman. She took over for him, his seat, and then was voted in, and she has kept power ever since that point. Sacramento, in general, surprisingly enough, the city itself is super liberal, and she's been able to keep her seat, and she's one of the most safe Democrats in the country. She's another one where, like Pelosi, where she doesn't have to really raise money or run a campaign anymore because she's so solidly there. Anytime she raises money, it usually goes to other campaigns. Now, she does not raise nearly as much money as Nancy Pelosi, and she doesn't have as much clout, but a very important congressperson, and one who, honestly, they rely on for a lot of leadership, especially for women, especially women of color. She's Asian American. She really does a great job of representing the city and everyone else. The next person we're going to talk about is Tom McClintock. Tom McClintock represents most of northern Sacramento and then the areas of Roseville and stuff like that. He is a pretty solid Republican, has been in Congress since 2008, 2007. Again, 2009, excuse me. But he is also another solid Republican. He kind of has to play more of the middle line, though. I mean, Sacramento in general is usually pretty middle of the road. It doesn't swing too Democrat or too Republican. So he has to kind of play a fine line. He's one I would look forward to actually get voted out of office next time. If there is a large number of Democrats who come voting against Trump's policies and who they vote for, Tom McClintock could be out of the running. So I would tell you to look out for him. Again, somebody who is just a solid conservative, votes consistently for conservative policies, has supported President Trump, but tries to at least remain on the middle road with some issues. So we'll see what happens with him. I don't know much about him compared to Doris Matsui and Ami Bera, but another interesting congressperson that I think you guys, if you live in Roseville, see what his policies are and see, whether you agree or disagree with what his policy is. The last representative, for those who live in Stockton, Lodi, and a couple other areas south of Elk Grove and Sacramento, it's Jerry McNerney. So Jerry McNerney has been a Democrat for a very long time. He represents all the Stockton area, and then I think a little bit closer to as you get towards Calaveras County, he represents all the way to that line, and then there's another congressperson who represents Calaveras County and stuff like that. McNerney has been representing that area since 2007. His main focus has really been on veterans and drug legislation. He's another one that also has to kind of play a fine line for those who live in Lodi, Stockton, and all those other areas. Stockton tends to be pretty Democrat, but then the rest of the area tends to be very Republican, and so it can kind of even out. But he is actually a very moderate Democrat. Very, very moderate, not super liberal in anything that he does, and he kind of plays that fine line because of the area that he lives. He needs to appease people who are more conservative, but also appease his very liberal voters. He's been in office this long. I don't see him really getting voted out either as of right now because just he's able to have kept that seat for so long. Don't be surprised if he's still there for a very long time. He is a little bit older, but there are some young people who are running in Stockton who might run against him, not on the Republican side necessarily, but on the Democrat side, who could really challenge him. There's a super liberal swing in the next election. He's another one, a Democrat that might not be safe from a primary election. So he might really have to fight in his primaries, but be pretty safe when it comes to his regular election against the Republicans. It just all depends on how the 2020 map's going to swing, what it looks like. If you have questions about that, let me know. I think that this is another one where I keep saying this, but Sacramento is a really interesting congressional area because there's so many things that are different about the different places that we all live. No one really is super anything. There's some that are really conservative areas. There's some that are really liberal areas, but it tends to be a pretty mixed bag. All these different congressional races can really be close depending on the year. And there's a lot of money that comes into Sacramento for the congressional districts because this can really make or break whether the House has leadership depending on how many votes and how many things they win. So I would tell you that to be mindful of that we have one of the most important places, especially in California, where even though it tends to be pretty liberal, our part of the state tends to also be it can also balance out with its very conservative side. So we'll have to see how this all plays out over the next couple of years and see what our district looks like over the next election cycle, because I really can't make a predictor as of right now what that's going to look like. And how that's going to come about. So keep in mind for that when it comes to your local and House leadership stuff. Another new congressperson that we should talk about who has gotten a lot of attention is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I completely butcher her name every time. AOC is her nickname, so let's just go with that. So AOC is a 29-year-old candidate from New York, and just a couple days older than I am. A crazy, crazy story. She was a waitress only like 2 or 3 years ago. Now has become this really powerful person in Congress because she kind of leads this ultra-liberal side of the House of Representatives. She's been pushing impeachment since the very beginning when she came to Congress. Has kind of always needled Leader Pelosi a little, or Speaker Pelosi quite often, because Speaker Pelosi tries to keep them all at bay. But this last impeachment stuff, she was not able to stop that. And obviously, I think Pelosi agreed that this was a really egregious breach of office potentially. So she decided to go through with it. So they're at bay right now because she actually got to have her impeachment trial. I would say she's going to be very influential over the next couple of years. Looks like she's in a very solidly liberal place. She has great name recognition. She's all over the place. President Trump hates her. It's a great way when you, as I said in my lecture, the more press you get, the more exposure you get, the more likely you're going to be voted in. And she's one of the most out there congresspeople in the country right now. So keep an eye on her and what she does over the next couple of years. She's going to be leading a very ultra liberal part of the party for the foreseeable future. Now moving on to the Senate, I'm only going to talk about a couple people in here. So the first one in the leadership that we'll talk about is the majority leader of the House, and that's Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is... I just get very frustrated with Mitch McConnell at times. He's changed a lot in the Senate process. Under his watch, there has been almost a complete elimination of the filibuster. It looks like it might be eliminated later this year. I don't see Mitch McConnell really being that good, looked at very kindly in history of the many things that he has done to really change the Senate. It's not just his fault. It was also Democrats' own doing as well. But Mitch McConnell will be known as a very kind of weak and ineffectual majority leader, honestly. He really can't keep most of his party together. Most of his party doesn't even like him, to tell you the truth. Democrats absolutely despise him and everything that he's done. He completely did not allow President Obama to put forward his own Supreme Court nomination, even though it was a year and a half almost before the election cycle, saying that the next president should be the one to nominate that, and has kept the Supreme Court conservative. And really, it was a good move on his part, one that will go down in history as probably a very bad move in general. I just don't think history is going to look very kind on Mitch McConnell and what he stands for. I mean, I would say that he's another moderate Republican, but he has taken a pretty hard stance on backing President Trump every step of the way. The minority leader of the House is Chuck Schumer, and Chuck Schumer took over for Harry Reid, who was at one point the majority leader, then the minority leader of the Democrats. Chuck Schumer is another one that I think is interesting. He had a really good relationship with Trump at some point because they're both from New York. He was able to wield some sort of power over him, but he always gets in the thorn of Trump's side just by needling him. He's a New Yorker, knows how to needle right back at Trump, and doesn't take any of Trump's crap usually. Harry Reid would have been really ineffectual at this. I would say that he holds a good amount of power for being minority leader because the majority of the Senate right now is very, very minimal. So if there's an important bill that's going to be passed or anything, he's able to kind of whip up the vote and get people to make sure that they're not going to vote for any Republican policies. I would say he's the reason that Obamacare was saved a couple years ago. He's another interesting case of a person who just worked his way up and now has become one of the more powerful people in Washington. He holds a lot of sway and majority. So I'm only going to mention the two whips in the Senate. Just very quickly, there's John Thune, who's a Republican. He's the majority whip, and Dick Durbin, who's the minority whip in the Senate. Honestly, Senate whips don't have as much power as the House whips. House is much more raucous. The Senate kind of has more leeway. So the leadership, it kind of depends on who's powerful, but majority and minority leader really hold the most power. The whips are kind of halfway between having a good amount of power. Right now, the president pro tempore, who's the third in power, quote unquote, in the Senate, is Chuck Grassley, a senator from Iowa, I think. Yeah, he's a senator from Iowa. Again, the title really doesn't matter. It's just who served longest in the Senate. But the important part of this leadership role is if the president were to die, the vice president were to die, the speaker of the House were to die, he's fourth in line for the presidency before it starts getting into Trump's, or the cabinet members, basically. So, important person to watch if anything were to happen, but again, I doubt that. This is really just in leadership role, kind of in name only sort of leadership role. So, two people that you should really pay attention to in the Senate. One is Bernie Sanders. You probably have all heard of him. Senator from Vermont, running for president again. Just had a heart attack recently. Hopefully he's okay. But Bernie represents a very socialist side of the Democratic Party. Kind of takes that same thing from AOC a little bit, has the leadership of that. He's a bit older, one of the oldest candidates we've ever had. I think he's older than Joe Biden, actually. Really, I don't know what kind of leadership role there he really is going to have. We'll see. He has a lot of leeway, sway in the Senate, and just, he has exposure. So he's going to be voted in as many times as he wants, at least to his Senate role. If he wins for president, I don't really know. We'll see about that. But Bernie's probably somebody you guys have heard about. He is a senator in the U.S. Senate right now. So he has two jobs, and he's doing both of them. I mean, he's trying to run for president and do that. And this is kind of what sometimes happens with Senate leaders especially, that if they run and they have name recognition, they're going to have to do two jobs. And that's a really tough thing to do. The second person that you should keep an eye on is Elizabeth Warren. This person is another really ultra-liberal kind of side of the Senate. But she is running also for president, and I definitely say you should keep an eye on her, because if you're looking at all the polls, it kind of goes Joe Biden right now, Elizabeth Warren's number 2, Bernie Sanders is number 3, and then Kamala Harris, who we're going to talk about in just a second, are all running right now for president, and they all look like the top 4 contenders for a spot. If anything, I would tell you Elizabeth Warren has a really good shot of taking over Joe Biden's position as the leader or the potential the most likely candidate for president. Right now, there was a lot of press that has been pretty negative about Joe Biden, and it's kind of picked up in the recent weeks, and people have a little bit more sympathetic because of the impeachment stuff centers around all of him. We'll see what actually happens. I don't know. Elizabeth Warren, though, is very, very liberal, and probably even in some policies a little bit more liberal than Bernie Sanders, but she, I think, is able to explain it a bit more. That's why a lot of Democrats really like her. She has a lot more personality than Hillary Clinton did. I think she has a lot of better ideas. She speaks more clearly. She was a professor in Boston. She's a senator from Massachusetts. This has huge name recognition and is a very prominent part of the liberal wing of the party of the Democrats. I don't know if she'll win president, but she is next in line, though. Trump, or if Biden really has some issues, she's going to be next in line. And I think she's going to really do pretty well. I think she'll do better than Hillary Clinton, but I don't know if she'll win. I don't know if she's electable. We keep saying all this stuff, but we'll have to just wait and see what plays out, but keep an eye on her. She's going to be super important over the next couple of weeks. The last two I'm going to talk about. First one is Senator Kamala Harris. She's from California. She was just recently voted in 2016. Another person who I think could be president one day. Maybe not this next time, but she really could be president. I think she is absolutely a great candidate for president and somebody who I think represents a lot of what California is all about. She was a prosecutor in California, the Attorney General of California, and then ran for Senate and has now become a really prominent face running for president. And when you run for president, sometimes you know you're not going to win, but you run anyway for the recognition. You get more interviews, you get all this other stuff because people want to know more about you since you're running for president. And she's really stepped up. I think that she has some really fascinating ideas. I think she's a little bit more moderate, but she comes off as very liberal. And then also on the other side, I think you could even say she's really liberal, but comes off as very moderate. So she could be really electable. I don't know if she's electable this cycle. If she runs for president again, I don't know if she'll win this time, but if she does, she'll do pretty well. And if she doesn't this time, I guarantee you she's going to run at some point again. She just has that recognition. She has built up this reputation. I think she'll be definitely voted in again for Senate. Whether she runs in 2024, 2028, whatever it happens to be, she's going to be part of our political system for a very long time. She's probably going to be a senator for that long as well. So keep this in mind as you go along, that she is definitely a person to keep an eye on over the next couple of years. The last one is Senator Dianne Feinstein, and she is our other California senator. She has been in office since 1992. And surprisingly enough, a lot of people thought in the last election cycle she just ran again. They thought she was going to retire. I really do think this is probably her last time. She's 80-something right now. Yeah, she's 86. By the time she leaves the office, she'll be like 90. I just don't think she's going to run again. She really had a pretty tough election cycle, like a primary cycle, because she's technically considered a pretty moderate Democrat. But honestly, she's not that moderate. She's pretty liberal. It wasn't liberal enough for a very liberal part of the California politics who were reacting to what Trump was doing. And I think she kind of got caught up in this whole thing where there were other people who were running who were very liberal as well, but they didn't have the clout that she did. And she got voted in. She was pretty safe after she won the primary. She got voted. She was almost a shoo-in for the Senate after that against a Republican, because nobody was going to vote for a Republican in a very heavily swing Democratic year. So she was always pretty safe. She's going to stay in office for another 5 years, I guess now. So she'll be 91 by the time she leaves, I guess. Has been a very influential senator. She's has a large reputation as just being a very solid Democrat, somebody who's always going to vote pretty liberal on most of bills that come through. California has been very lucky to have her. She's built a fabulous reputation for herself and for the state. I think that she has been a great public servant, and she will continue to be for at least the next couple years. And I think she kind of uses her clout a lot when it comes to what bills are going to be passed. She's been huge on gun control debate, has been really advocating for a change in those policies. But where everything else goes, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see who runs for her seat after she leaves in a couple years, but she is solidly there for the next. So that's it. I hope you guys at least got some more information about the people who are leading you, who represent you, who may represent you in the future in other capacities, not just in the congressional spots that they're in right now. If you have any questions about this, let me know. I am really excited for you guys to get going on the rest of your stuff. Next week, we're working on the executive branch. We're going to be breaking all that down and what's going on there. But you guys just need to look over more of your stuff and make sure that you're keeping up with everything. I will see you guys in a couple days, and let me know if you have questions.